You can go out with a locust egg on Shabbat, or the tooth of a fox, or the nail of a crucified person, or with anything that we think it has some kind of healing power, provided that doctors say it actually works.
If you have a prescription.
You want to tell me you're justified in eating dog, you're going to have to show me the clinical studies.
Hi, and welcome to Responsa Radio, where you ask and we answer questions of Jewish law in modern times. I'm Rabbi Avi Killip, Executive Vice President at Hadar, here with Rabbi Ethan Tucker, Rosh Yeshiva at Hadar, a center for Jewish learning and community building based in New York City. You can check us out and learn more at hadar.org. We have a fun question today. I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about it.
That always makes me a little nervous.
Yeah, it means a little bit outside of the box, this question. The questioner writes, I occasionally get a massage. Recently, there was a change in massage therapists. The new therapist emphasizes that she uses Reiki, which is somehow concentrating an energy field to help in healing. I mentioned this to a friend who is very knowledgeable in Reiki, and she mentioned that Reiki is an independent, sentient entity with volition and intelligence. She also says that someone doing Reiki involves the spirit of the Reiki entity through specific chants and phrases. Now I am concerned that what I thought was just an energy healing technique is somehow tied up with sorcery, witchcraft, divination. Bottom line, is it okay to get massages that include Reiki energy healing?
Definitely farther afield than most of my experience. You lost me at massage.
You're not a massage person?
I've had one or two in my life, but no, I'm not in that zone for the most part. But yes, it was interesting to sort of think about this and really appreciate the questioner's sincerity around, I don't know, I feel like I was doing this thing for certain bodily and maybe mental benefits. And am I being sucked into something that I didn't sign up for?
I feel like I'll have a question also for you, which is Reiki it's not exactly mainstream, but it's also not rare, Yeah. It's not like this is a totally, very esoteric question. They found someone who practices some sort of strange thing that no one's ever heard of. I think a lot of people have heard of Reiki, maybe have had some experience like this where people would say like, oh, my mom is a Reiki master, a Reiki practitioner. Yeah. And I'm curious also whether the sort of prevalence of something like Reiki is going to matter in terms of making it more or less problematic. So.
Yeah, I think this is one of those cases where, we're not going to find a source that talks about Reiki earlier than very contemporary sources. And I did when I looked into this. Yes, this is one where we're admitting we had a heads up on the question and we do some research, that there is a division of opinion. In that sense, I mean, someone can do a Google search on this and find, some rabbis say it's okay. Some rabbis say it's not okay. Our podcast added value in this discussion is less, here's what it is, it's okay, it's not okay, and more, what are some of the factors, right, that are coming together here. But the question of, hey, there's a treatment or a practice or something out there that people are doing. Can I do it? That's super old. And I want to break it down actually into two categories because we can only understand some of the controlling sources here with appreciating that these are two different questions. One question is it forbidden to do this practice at all? In other words, is this a kind of thing that you just should never be doing this because it's idolatrous, sorcery, whatever? We'll get to some of the other categories. Then a second question is, even if you can do it, is it an authorized medical practice that would qualify for overriding Shabbat? Now, of course, you would only override Shabbat in the case of danger to life. And no one's claiming that this Reiki treatment is saving someone's life. I mean,
somebody might be.
Maybe.
I didn't ask them.
In the context of the question, right, doesn't seem it's that. But it's still important to sort of understand that category because something could, in theory, clear the first hurdle. which is to say, yeah, it's fine to do that, but not be something that we actually take seriously as a medical practice, right? Or it's not enough that it competes with, overrides other area of normative halacha. Again, the questioner is really only asking part one, which is, can I do this at all?
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting the way you've divided this into question one and question two. If question one is this okay? The answer I want might be like, well, it's not really a thing. It's actually nothing. And question two of like, is it medicine? Might be like, oh yeah, it's really actually a thing. It's just so much a thing that it's not voodoo, it's medicine.
Right.
They might cut in opposite directions.
That's right.
Actually.
I think that's absolutely right. So look, just to sort of cite some of the basic biblical precedents here, which the questioner already is alluding to, when the Mishnah says like, don't turn to idols and don't consult a sorcerer or a diviner, etc., and uses a phrase that I think we talked about in our earlier episode on astrology, which you can check out if you haven't listened to. It was a good one. Be tamim, perfect, straight, somehow non-deviant from your relationship with God. This is this sort of phrase.
To me means don't use alternative medical.
I don't know if we want to go that far, but there is a notion, and we actually explored it in that episode, of the idea of, maybe you just sort of like trust in God to like deal with your body. I mean, there's certain almost like branches of borderline like Christian Science, approach to the body that you have in certain sources. But even though overall Jewish sources are very embracing of like medical treatment as a way of keeping people healthy, there's a nervousness about going to places that feel like they're taking you to like an alternate source of authority. I think even the biblical formulation of al tifnu el ha'elilim, do not turn towards idols, indicates that there's sometimes a cultural or practice in one way or another that can feel like you're turning to another source of authority, not just doing a practice. I hear a little bit of that in the anxiety of the questioner, like, I wanted this massage. I didn't necessarily want to be turning to the sentient spirit of Reiki to heal me, because I'd like God to heal me or help me, and I don't want to go there.
Well, the turn language also makes me think: is it turning away from something as much as towards? Where it might be like, well, so long as you're going to your actual doctor and shul, then maybe Reiki is fine.
Right.
But if you're like, I don't do shacharit anymore because instead I have Reiki now, then that would be a sign that you've turned towards something.
Right. So I think, if that's an overarching thing, we kind of have to ask a little bit now, and rabbinic sources are going to push us to interrogate, what is the nature of the practice you're talking about? Like what's going on? So I want to start with kind of a really weird Mishnah.
My favorite.
In Masechet Shabbat. I'll just sort of read it to you. Let's just let it wash over people. You can go out in public on Shabbat with a locust egg and with a fox's tooth and with a nail from a crucified person, mishum refuah, in order to be healed, says Rabbi Meir, or for the purposes of healing.
Yeah.
Okay? Locust egg, fox tooth, crucified person's nail. Okay? Remember, there were many people who were crucified back then, so we're not necessarily talking about the Christian Messiah. But that says Rabbi Meir. The sages respond to him. I'm translating idiomatically. What are you, out of your mind? You think you can do that on Shabbat? You can't even do that on Tuesday because it falls under the rubric of Darchei HaEmori, the ways of the Amorites. Essentially, we translate freely as sort of non-Jewish superstitious practices that you have no business doing at all.
This is amazing. It's exactly what my instinct was. Either it's real or it's completely not allowed.
This text pulls us in that direction, right? Rabbi Meir seems to say, well, these are like real things that I recognize. And I think what's interesting about this is the mishum refu'ah here, because of healing, it's not really claiming you're going to drop dead and I'm administering some potion to you to save you.
Sounds like they're amulets or something.
Yeah, right? There's some notion of, well, you might be at risk from something terrible happening to you. So you're allowed to do this because it will keep you safe. And I don't want to undersell like what it means to go out, right, on Shabbat with something is to do one of the core forbidden labors, which is to transfer something from a private domain to a public domain, which normally we would say is a core violation of Shabbat.
Yeah.
Rabbi Meir says, you go ahead and do it. To use your language, it's super real. And therefore, however we process, we're not going to get deep into the Shabbat component here because it's not the main question. But however you understand how the Shabbat prohibitions work, it encroaches on them, overrides them, right, in some way. And the other view is some version of this is nonsense. And this is pulling you away from sort of the Jewish way of thinking about things and healing. And indeed, I think Darchei Amori is also a category in general. We think of the ways of the Amorites. We only slap that label on something. We'll see this sharpened in a minute when we kind of think the whole thing is stupid. Mm-hmm. It's not just, that's not the way it's very effective, but that's not the way we heal. Right. It's usually, that is nonsense. By the way, just so we see, like the context here, at least the Talmud's reconstruction of, well, what were these things helpful for, right? They unpack it. They say, well, you can go out with a locust egg because that helps with an earache. You can go out with a fox tooth because if it's the tooth of a dead fox, it'll help you sleep better. And if it was a tooth extracted from a live fox, then it will help you wake up if you sleep too much. There is, at least here, at least for explaining Rabbi Meir's side of the equation, they're like, yeah, that's what people would use this for. The Talmud's not necessarily weighing in on, do we have the actuarial charts on how effective they were, et cetera. But that's the kind of stuff they were used for. And that justifies, for his view, using them. And it does seem to give some credence, right? When it doesn't just leave it as some open superstition. That passage in the Talmud seems to be like, oh yeah, locust egg. Like that's really good for an earache.
Right.
Here's the next important entrant, which in a way like clarifies, but sort of raises the stakes of this debate. Abaye and Rava, the two great Talmudic sages, are then quoted in the Talmud as saying, anything that is for the sake of healing is not subject to the concern of Darchei HaEmori, the ways of the Amorites. Okay?
You can be less suspicious if it's for healing.
Yeah, I would say even more than less suspicious. Basically, like, it's just not a problem. If you are doing it for a functional reason, it actually helps you with your earache or with infection or this or that, that's just not what we're adjudicating in the context of Darchei HaEmori, the ways of the Amorites. In a way, they're clarifying. The only time we talk about that category, reinforcing our reading, is when you think the thing is nonsense. Okay? Now, we should note here, right, the category of the ways of the Amorites is not the category of idolatry. Actually, a well-established point elsewhere, starts in the Tosefta, quoted in the Talmud and Sanhedrin and a number of other places, which is you're not allowed to use idolatrous stuff to heal yourself. You actually would have to give up your life if the only way you could save it was by somehow allowing an idol or an idolatry item to heal you. So here's where we have sort of two axes, and I want to go a little further in the Talmud to draw them out. There is the sort of binary of, are we dealing with a god or not, right? And if the answer to that is yes, it's a full stop no.
Avodah Zarah.
It's a full stop no. If it's something that, people worship, there's an entity that people worship, as opposed to, I don't know, for the Star Wars fans among our base, talking about the Force, right? Like, that's not a god. That's not something. It's a way people talk about the energy in the universe. My understanding is that Reiki is more like that, though when you get the language of sentient, I don't know where that lands. So not for me to comment right here on exactly how to draw that line. But yeah, checklist number 1 is make sure it's not actually a practice of a foreign god who is worshipped, who is turned to heal me as an entity that is acting on you. But if the answer to that is no, right, then your question on some level is, well, is this in the category of healing or not? Right? That's so far what we've heard.
Right.
If it's in the category of healing, well, then it's fine. But the Gemara immediately picks up on Abaye and Rava and says, wait a minute, does that imply that if it's not for healing, then it's definitely not okay? Because I'm pretty sure we heard the following tradition, and now they cite a Braita.
Okay.
If a tree starts losing its fruit, you can smear it with red paint or load it with stones. So the Talmud then says, well, I get loading it with stones because that actually seems like a physical action where you're worried the tree is getting weak. You're shoring up its base. Exactly. And so you're sort of actually doing a physical action, but smearing it with red paint. They're astounded. They're like, what other than basically some superstition could be painting the tree? So they have this as like an established ruling. You're allowed to paint a tree where the fruit falls, that's red. Like that seems fine, even though it has no function whatsoever. So they deflect it, right? And they say, no, you don't think the red paint is going to heal the tree. What you think is people will see that the tree has a red mark and they'll daven for the tree. That is to say, they'll pray to God, can you help make sure the trees in our land produce fruit? It's just a trigger for people to respond. You misunderstood what that practice was. And at this point, they're sort of holding the line of, unless you can explain a practice as being actually, quote unquote, medically effective, in this case for the tree, or it can be interpreted as a call to spiritual action, you're not allowed to do it.
This is a good time to take a quick break. We'll get right back to this episode, but first I want to let you know about an upcoming program with Hadar that you will love. The Hadar National Shabbaton, January 30th to February 1st in East Brunswick, New Jersey. This is a Shabbat of powerful davening, engaging learning, delicious meals, and great kids programming. Come connect with an incredible network of people working together to build more meaningful Jewish lives. Visit hadar.org/Shabbaton for more information. Now let's dive back in.
Ravina takes this a step further and says, hey, why is it okay that we hang little clusters of dates on palm trees? And the context seems to be when the palm tree isn't doing well. Okay. Mm-hmm. They would go up and put these little clusters of
date palm.
Don't dates
grow on palm trees?
Yeah, but let's say in that season they're not growing well. You sort of put this thing up there to encourage it,
just to remind the tree what it
seems
looks like.
He's like, this seems super crazy, and it should be a ways of the Amorite problem. Oh, it must be okay because it must just be calling people's attention to the fact that they should pray for the palm tree. All right.
I love that the rational thing that would help is prayer. It's
yes, correct.
It's not why do I pray Mishaberach for them? Well, because I hope that it leads the doctors to pay more attention to the person if they see that someone's praying for them. It's no. Why do I have the doctors come just to remind us to pray for them?
The prayer is the real thing, right? So the truth is they're willing to entertain something that they feel actually does something. That's the thing where they say, oh, you're putting rocks on the base of the tree. I can understand how that would stabilize the tree or help it retain water.
Yeah.
But this other symbolic stuff, they basically are unwilling to validate it unless you have some theory that it's just triggering people to care and maybe they'll pray to God.
Yeah.
Even though what you do see is there's a background practice where people are doing these things, and probably the main reason they're doing it is some kind of, you can say, superstitious, a theurgic move where you're trying to, through your action, coax something to happen, sort of like divination, right? Like by doing this, I will coax this out. Okay, rabbinic sources are kind of trying to hold the line of either you have a theory of how the thing actually heals, or you have some secondary theory of, no, I'm just doing it to get attention, or it's forbidden to do the thing. So bringing it back to Reiki, right? With this frame, we're already assuming it's not a god. Let's assume we've checked that box.
It's not a different god.
That's right. But you would still, according to these sources, have to have some theory of how it actually works.
Well, so it sounds like if I think it's an alternative god, it's a definite no.
Right.
If I have like scientific proven studies that it does work, then it's a definite yes.
Yeah.
Because then it's just science.
I think that's right.
Right? The middle ground is where it's not a god, but it's also not necessarily science, in which case I just have to have some theory about what it is.
It seems like it's that. To get to some sharper formulation here, I want to see some of the things that the Rambam says about this text and another text, which is another kind of wild remedy text. And we might be able to piece together at least one system, right, of how you might think this through. So the Rambam, who famously is a physician and we think of as like a hyper-rationalist and, right, very focused on all of this, has a little bit of a problem with the locust egg text and the crucified person's nail.
I would imagine he may.
Because what's his problem? These are not things that he would intuitively sort of chalk up to actual normal medicine.
Not enough scientific studies?
Not enough scientific studies. But it's a Mishnah that seems like, remember, so there was a debate between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim's position, but in the flow of the sugya, it seems like Rabbi Meir's position is given weight. And they're like, yeah, as long as it, counts as refuah, counts as some healing, then it's fine. And that seems to sort of affirm his view because he said it's mishum refuah, it's because of healing. So the Rambam feels pressure to codify the specific policy, but on the other hand, he thinks a certain way. So listen to what he does. I think this is great. He's like, you can go out with a locust egg on Shabbat or the tooth of a fox or the nail of a crucified person or with anything that we think it has some kind of healing power, provided that doctors say it actually works.
If you have a prescription.
Yeah. And in a way, he's actually hedging here. I think if we say the quiet part out loud, the Rambam, I think, is saying some version of, they thought this worked. So that's why they said it's okay to do it on Shabbat. Yeah. They were working with the science of their time. Right. If you ask me now, I'm going to tell you, based on Aristotle, Galen, Arabic science, etc., I'm going to tell you you're not going out with that fox tooth because the doctors today are not going to say that counts. He doesn't say this explicitly, but I think that's the inescapable conclusion of why he puts that appendage, right? Yeah. Provided that the doctors say it works. Don't think there's some blanket, I have Talmudic authorization to go out with locust egg. No. You have Talmudic authorization to take advantage of healing methods that are somehow sort of recognized and understood to be valid.
So do people use this to permit things like, you've got a heart monitor that you've got to wear on Shabbat or something like, a doctor prescribed it?
Yeah, I think heart monitor is probably easy because there will say, oh my God, that's keeping you alive. Right? But other things where you'll get to discussions of like, I don't know, do I have a permission to, insulin also basically in a lot of circumstances is keeping you alive or preventing you from having something. But there are sometimes therapies where like, well, something happened to you if you don't do it or don't carry it around for a day. Is that like, maybe not, maybe it would be fine. But once we're already in the zone of, well, it is a healing necessity, that'll be relevant for rabbis to say you're allowed to carry that outside of the Eruv, right? Or whatever it is. If it's a proven form of healing, right, we may allow you to do something like that, even though the Rambam might have you move on from the fox's tooth, right, as the specific thing.
Right. He's adding, so to speak, like real healing, by the way.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. These, as you said, there's a lot of wacky cases in the Talmud. It's worth mentioning another one like this. What do you do if someone is bitten by a rabid dog?
I knew there was a dog thing.
They don't have shots. The Mishnah talks about whether you can feed the person who was bitten by the rabid dog the lobe of the liver of that dog.
Yeah.
All right. There was clearly some kind of theory that some people held, which is that's the cure. The antidote to the poison of the rabid dog is a piece of its own liver. And so basically the first view here says, the problem is kosher, you're eating part of a dog.
Yeah.
Right? You can't do that. Rabbi Matya ben Harash, the named rabbi in the Mishnah, allows it. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the question is like, what's going on there? What's the basis for that debate?
Right.
Like, why is Rabbi...
One thinks it's medicine and one just thinks it's a dog.
Okay, so here's what the Rambam says in his commentary on that Mishnah, to go to him again. He says, the halacha does not follow Rabbi Matya ben Harash, who allowed feeding the lobe of the liver to someone, because it's not effective. It's just a sigula. It's just a superstitious remedy. Yeah. Okay? It's a thing that like people feel good, or probably if we were to talk in like condescending terms that I think the Rambam would be willing to use, the foolish masses think that does something, but we know it doesn't. And therefore, right, actually the interesting way I think he would cast the debate is Rabbi Matya ben Harash basically sort of indulges the popular belief that this will help. And essentially be like, I don't know, who knows what's going to help someone? They think it'll help, like, go ahead. Right. Whereas the Chachamim, the majority view here says, no, you can't justify eating part of a dog without saying to yourself with complete clarity, this has to be effective, and there's got to be basically a rational basis with empirical evidence. That's a very high bar. It seems like even if I'm just at the sigula level, I think I'm doing something that will help me. That feels like it might conceptually be sufficient to take it out of the realm of some ways of the Amorites or seeking after idolatry. And this is where it's interesting because the Rambam writes something else in the Guide for the Perplexed, his philosophical work, but where he's trying to also sort of understand the mitzvot. And he comes back and quotes this line from the Talmud. He says, anything that's for the sake of healing, right, is not subject to Darchei Amori. You're allowed to do it on a Tuesday. He basically says, if it's determined by natural reason, it's permitted. If not, it's forbidden. And then he cites the whole thing on the trees and the red mark and this and that. If the dyeing has no natural rationale whatsoever, you can't in any way explain how putting the red mark on the tree is going to help the tree, then it's forbidden unless you can justify it by saying people will pray over it, okay? But then he says, but what about the fox tooth or the crucifixion nail, right? And here he says explicitly what was implicit in the Mishnah. Yeah, but they believed that it was effective, and they believed by experience that it was effective at the time of the Mishnah. And therefore, it was okay.
Do you think that means placebo?
So I think so in the following sense. The Rambam, the second he says, the fox tooth and all of that, those were believed to be okay at the time. What he's essentially saying is they weren't. They weren't actually doing anything.
They didn't work.
But they believed that it worked.
Right.
And that, for him, removes it from the category of Darchei HaAmori, of the ways of the Amorites. Now, if you pay attention here, the Rambam is not contradicting himself because the two cases are quite different. The case of the liver lobe, okay, is essentially what is the threshold I need to pass to violate some other piece of halacha? I'm not allowed to eat dog. Okay? You want to tell me you're justified in eating dog, you're going to have to show me the clinical studies. And the Talmud has a whole thing on this also with Shabbat, like when can you go out with an amulet? And basically you have to be able to show that it healed 3 different people 3 different times, which is basically their version of a clinical study.
Right.
You're going to show me a clinical study, fine, we'll let you eat the dog liver. Otherwise, that's treif and you haven't proven it'll make a difference. But that's about overriding other prohibitions. Here, we're just adjudicating not actually the Shabbat prohibition,
but the Tuesday.
The Tuesday. Do I look at someone who walks out with a rabbit's foot and be like, what the heck are you doing? Like, that's not allowed. And there the Rambam says something interesting. He basically says there the standard is lower. There, I don't need the clinical studies to allow you to do this. I just need to see, and this goes to your point of widespread, I just need to see, do people, whether they're self-deluding or not, do they actually think this thing works?
Yeah.
If they do, they're pursuing healing. They're not turning to the ways of the Amorites. And this goes back to my formulating of this question as 2 levels, right? There is this sort of first level of asking, are we turning towards idols and other gods? In that way, right, full stop. Then there's the question of, let's say not. What's the nature of our interaction with this activity? Do you experience this as working? And you're like, like sometimes, yeah, and I'm trying it for a while and it's a trend.
Yeah.
I think the Rambam might start to be like, I don't think you should do that. If the Rambam would look at you and you would answer, well, actually, yeah, like this has done wonders for my sleep, for this, for that. I have tons of friends who swear by it. We all do it. We experience it as mattering. He might say, personally, I think that's a crock.
Yeah.
But I can't tell you can't do it.
Maybe one message that we're trying to receive from these texts is like, you should pursue healing. Like if something might heal you, even if you're not 100% sure, if you think it might work or if you could open your mind to that, like healing is something worth pursuing. I don't know if that message, maybe even Rambam would say like, yeah, okay, healing is something worth pursuing.
Yeah, I think, right. I don't know that the Rambam gets you to a place in his language of, I'm going to encourage you to do this. I think it seems more like he's just not willing to tell you can't if you're really convinced that it will help. I mean, his language in the guide is very striking, where he says basically, even if there is no rational theory behind it, but you feel from experience that it makes a difference, then that's not Mishum Darchei Amori. That's not the ways of the Amorites. Now, I think he's trying to create that middle zone where he would say, well, you can't violate Shabbat for something that doesn't have the clinical study. But the Tuesday question, do you have a coherent theory of how it's helping you or experiencing? All right, that I can't necessarily say no to.
Yeah, I also think in this category of like, but healing is different. We've talked about like Rambam saying, okay, they thought that, we don't think that now. There's something about healing that is not a simple cause and effect, right? Like even the medicines that do work don't always work, and they don't always work for everybody. That like once we've entered this realm of healing, we're in like a different kind of territory where we have to be a little more open-minded about like what's going to work and what's not going to work. I will say this, from what I understand of Reiki, like one of the things that is happening in Reiki is significant attention from one person to the other person, right? They use the language of energy harnessing, but certainly that in life, that is something we experience, not in a scientific way, but in an experiential way as like true, right? Like people who are sick need to be visited, and our tradition has a lot to say about visiting the sick and showing up in person. We did a COVID episode actually on like what is the significance of showing up in person to visit the sick. And to the extent that Reiki healing is like one person being hyper present for the other person and paying all of their attention to that person, that could feel very organically, sanctioned and important. Maybe that's like saying I put red on the tree just in order to get people to pray for it. Is like I'm doing Reiki. That's why I showed up. But what you're experiencing is another human who came to visit me today.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing way of sort of deploying that earlier precedent of the tree, which I hadn't thought of, which is in a way what that Talmudic passage tells you is it could be the exact same action, but actually what matters enormously is how you think about what you're doing. I don't know if there's an absolute direct line from Ravina and the dates and the Breita and the red mark to that, but it's the way of thinking, right, that's going on in that Talmudic passage. Like, now I think there, that can cut a very different way, right, which is to say, well, can we reorient you to get that right without this specific practice if it's just getting you another way? I just want to give one more voice here, which really goes in a sharp direction, sort of, leans into the Rambam in the Mishnah commentary, where he was like, only if physicians approve of it, and doesn't seem to engage with the Rambam in the guide. And that's the Aruch HaShulchan, Rav Yechiel Michal Epstein, who is already like living turn of the 20th century, living in a time where there's a sense of like, I know what Western medicine is, and it works in a predictable way, and this and that. And as Western medicine, particularly at that point in time, I think in some ways we're at the other end of an arc of wondering what the limits of Western medicine are. But at that point in time, there's a sense of, oh, I now see clearly the difference between like real science and pseudoscience. And he basically is like, yeah, anything where he formulates it the other way, essentially. If it has been proven to be ineffective, you can't do it. Right? If basically there's some blind studies or whatever, and it's like, oh, this clearly doesn't do anything, right, then you can't. Okay. And his sort of final statement on this, to bring us full circle to where we started, he says, look, you want a clear guideline here? Tamim tihyeh im Hashem Elokecha. Be pure, be straight with the Lord your God. And there's only 3 things you should basically ever do when you're trying to heal yourself. Yeah. 1, go to an expert doctor. 2, daven. 3, give tzedakah. Those things work. Okay. Now, we don't feel 100% competent here to give you the full answer on the idolatry level of what's happening here, but the framing of what you're doing and what's your experience of it, those things seem like they matter and are the way to evaluate this.
Well, this last text sounds like he's sort of saying, like, if you have to ask, don't do it. Like, if it's making you feel uncomfortable, don't do it. Like, I think the thing that can be helpful in this last idea of like tshuva and tefillah is not to say like, because those are rational, whereas this is irrational, but to say if you were looking for a Jewish tradition to offer you like spiritual healing and community, do that through tefillah and tzedakah. Like, there is a Jewish technology for you for that. So like, do the scientific healing that you need, and then use the Jewish technologies of tefillah and tzedakah for your spiritual communal healing, as opposed to needing to turn to Reiki for that. As we've said, like, we think of our podcast as very far-reaching for all kinds of Jewish people, and I have no doubt that we have listeners probably who are engaged in Reiki, maybe as patients, maybe as practitioners even, and to say, like, I would invite you again to write to us, and would love to hear about how you think about this practice. How does it interact with your Judaism? Does it feel problematic? And wish everybody everywhere to find the healing that you are looking for and need.
Dear God of our ancestors, help us renew our faith. Grant us a perfect healing. Bring peace to all our day. Elna, Rifanala,
Have a halachic question you'd like answered on the show? Email us at responsa@hadar.org. Responsa Radio is a project of the Hadar Institute. Thanks to Chana Kupetz and Jeremy Tabick for producing this podcast, and to David Khabinsky for recording and editing this episode.